I never expected that a plumbing disaster would change my life, but that's exactly what happened when my ceiling collapsed. It sounds like the start of a bad joke, doesn't it? But for me, it was the beginning of everything. Before all that, my life ran on a schedule so precise you could set a watch by it. My name is Miles, and I'm a graphic designer who works from home, a job that suits my quiet, orderly nature perfectly. My world was my small, one-bedroom apartment, a sanctuary of clean lines, neutral colors, and predictable peace. My days were a comfortable loop of brewing coffee, sitting at my desk, creating logos and layouts, and then winding down with a book or a movie. It was a good life, a stable life. But if I were being honest with myself, usually late at night when the city outside my window had fallen silent, I'd admit it was also a lonely one. I was content, but I wasn't necessarily happy. There's a difference, you know. The disruption to my carefully curated routine began a few weeks earlier, with noise. The apartment next to mine had been vacant for years, a dusty time capsule from the 70s. But now, it was being renovated, and the process was anything but quiet. Saws whined, hammers banged, and a chorus of loud, cheerful voices echoed through the walls from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. At the center of this whirlwind was him. His name was Caleb. I didn't know it at the time, of course. To me, he was just the lead contractor, the man whose confident instructions I could hear through the plaster. I saw him most days in the hallway or out by the parking lot. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his dusty t-shirts and arms covered in a roadmap of fading tan lines and muscle. His hair was a dark, unruly mess, perpetually dusted with drywall powder, and he had a laugh that seemed to fill whatever space he was in. He was, in a word, overwhelming. He was life and energy and motion, a stark contrast to my own measured existence. And he was incredibly, painfully attractive. I'd find myself timing my trips to the mailbox to coincide with his crew's lunch break, just to catch a glimpse of him leaning against their work van, drinking a soda and laughing with his guys. He had this easy, unself-conscious way about him, a confidence that felt as natural as breathing. Of course, I filed him away in the mental cabinet labeled completely unattainable. He was the kind of guy I'd always found beautiful from a distance, the kind of guy who, in my experience, dated cheerleaders in high school and beautiful, bubbly women in adulthood. He existed in a different universe, one with more sunshine and laughter than mine. So, I observed from my quiet corner, never imagining our worlds would do more than briefly, peripherally, touch. I was the silent neighbor, and he was the beautiful noise. That was the extent of our story, or so I thought. The inciting incident, the catalyst for the complete upheaval of my life, happened on a Tuesday. I was at my desk, trying to finalize a color palette for a client, when I heard a strange, gushing sound from next door, followed by a torrent of shouted curses. I tried to ignore it, turning my music up, but then I heard a new sound, a faint, ominous dripping. I looked up at my own ceiling. A small, brownish spot had appeared on the pristine white plaster above my desk. As I watched, frozen, the spot darkened and grew. The dripping sound became a steady patter, like rain. I scrambled to move my computer and electronics just as the first drop of water hit my keyboard. Within minutes, the patter became a trickle, and the trickle became a miniature waterfall cascading directly onto my workspace. The carefully maintained peace of my sanctuary had been breached. I ran into the hallway just as Caleb burst out of the adjacent apartment, his face pale beneath the grime. Water was pooling around his work boots. "Oh man," he breathed, his eyes wide with horror as he looked from the water seeping under his door to me, standing there helplessly. "A main pipe just blew. I am so sorry." The next few hours were a chaotic blur of plumbers, a flustered building manager, and industrial fans. My ceiling was ruined. A huge, sagging, waterlogged section of it looked like it could give way at any moment. My apartment, my safe space, was now a damp, humid mess that smelled of wet plaster and mildew. It was uninhabitable. Our building manager, a well-meaning but largely ineffective man named Mr. Henderson, wrung his hands. "We have a vacant unit on the 3rd floor, but it's also being prepped for some minor work. It's not ideal. It might take a day or two to get it ready for you." A day or two. I looked at my soggy apartment, the plastic sheets draped over my furniture, and felt a wave of despair. Where was I supposed to go? I don't have family in the city, and my friends all live in tiny apartments with no spare room. A hotel was an option, I guess, but it felt so impersonal, so sterile. It was then that Caleb stepped forward, wiping his hands on his jeans. He looked genuinely wrecked with guilt. He'd been silent for most of the conversation with Henderson, just watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "This is my fault," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I was rushing the plumbing inspection. I shouldn't have. He can't stay in some half-finished unit." He turned his gaze from Henderson to me. My heart did a stupid little jump. It was the first time he'd ever really, truly looked at me. "Listen, I know this is weird, because we don't know each other, but I have a spare room at my place. It's clean, it's quiet. You can stay there until your apartment is fixed. It's the least I can do." The offer hung in the air, electric and terrifying. My mind was screaming 1,000 different things at once. Stay with him? In his apartment? The guy from my daydreams. The guy I'd convinced myself was from another planet? It felt impossible, like a scene from a movie I wouldn't dare to watch. Mr. Henderson looked relieved. "Well, that's very generous of you, Caleb." I hesitated, my natural caution warring with the sheer, logistical desperation of my situation. I couldn't impose. I stammered, the words feeling flimsy. Caleb shook his head, a small, almost pleading look in his eyes. "It's not an imposition. It's my fault. Please, let me make this right." And just like that, with the smell of wet drywall in the air and my life in a state of sudden disarray, I heard myself say yes. I agreed to move into a stranger's guest room. A stranger who happened to be the man I'd been secretly watching for weeks. The beautiful noise was inviting me into his world, and I was too tired and overwhelmed to do anything but walk through the door. Caleb lived about 10 minutes away, in a newer building with a small balcony overlooking a park. His apartment was not what I expected. I suppose I pictured a chaotic bachelor pad, tools and clothes strewn about. But it was surprisingly tidy. It was lived in, yes, with a worn leather sofa and a stack of magazines on the coffee table, but it was clean. The air smelled like sawdust and something vaguely like cinnamon. "The guest room is this way," he said, leading me down a short hall. "The bathroom is right across from it. Make yourself at home. Seriously. Kitchen, living room, whatever you need." He seemed almost as nervous as I was, which was a surprise. He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging a small cloud of dust. "I'm usually out of here by 7 in the morning and not back till 6 or 7 at night, so you'll have the place to yourself most of the time." The guest room was simple, a double bed with a plain gray comforter, a small desk, and a window that looked out onto a quiet, tree-lined street. It was anonymous, and yet, standing there with my overnight bag, it felt like the most significant room in the world. I was in his space, breathing his air. The sheer proximity was making my pulse race. The first couple of days were a dance of awkward politeness. We moved around each other like cautious satellites, offering good mornings and good nights, but not much else. I'd hear him leave in the morning, the solid clunk of his work boots on the floorboards, and feel a strange mix of relief and disappointment. I spent my days at a coffee shop, working on my laptop, trying to maintain some semblance of my old routine. But the evenings were different. We couldn't avoid each other forever in a 2-bedroom apartment. The first real shift happened on the third night. I was making a simple pasta for dinner when he came home, looking exhausted. He dropped his tool belt by the door with a heavy thud and sighed. "Smells good," he said, his voice weary. "I, made too much," I lied. "Do you want some?" A genuine smile broke across his face, lighting up his tired features. It was the first time he'd smiled at me like that. "I would love some. I was just going to have cereal." So we sat at his small dining table and ate pasta. It was clumsy at first. We talked about the repairs on my apartment, about my work, about his long days. The conversation was stilted, but it was a start. We were building a tiny, fragile bridge between our two very different worlds. The real revelation, the moment I saw past the handsome contractor and caught a glimpse of the man underneath, came that weekend. I was looking for an extra blanket in the hall closet when I knocked over a large, flat portfolio case I hadn't noticed before. It fell open, spilling its contents onto the floor. My first instinct was to quickly gather everything up, but my eyes caught on one of the pages. It was a pencil drawing, incredibly detailed and delicate, of an old, crumbling church. The line work was exquisite, capturing the texture of the stone and the play of light and shadow with a skill that took my breath away. I shuffled through the other pages. There were architectural renderings of fantastical buildings, precise and imaginative. There were landscape sketches of windswept trees and serene lakes. This wasn't a hobby. This was a passion. This was art. "What are you doing?" I jumped, dropping the papers. Caleb was standing in the hallway, his face a mask of horror and embarrassment. He looked like I had just discovered his deepest, most private secret, which, I suppose, I had. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, my face burning as I scrambled to pick up the drawings. "I knocked this over by accident." I didn't mean to pry. He just stood there for a moment, his confident exterior completely gone. He looked young and vulnerable. "It's fine," he said, his voice tight. He knelt down and started helping me, his movements jerky. "It's just stupid stuff." "Stupid?" I held up the drawing of the church. "Caleb, this is incredible. You're an amazing artist." The words came out before I could stop them, completely earnest and uncalculated. He looked away, a faint blush creeping up his neck. "I wanted to be an architect," he said quietly, stacking the papers into a neat pile. "Went to school for it for 2 years. But then my dad got sick, and I had to come home and help with the family business. Construction. It is what it is," he shrugged, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the weight of a different life in his voice. "Just sketches. I haven't shown them to anyone." He looked up and met my eyes, and in that moment, the dynamic between us shifted. I wasn't just the quiet neighbor he was helping out of guilt. I was someone who had seen a piece of his soul, a part of him that he kept hidden away from the world of hammers and saws. My attraction to him had, until then, been mostly physical, a response to his easy confidence and bright energy. But now, it was deepening into something more complex, more tender. I was seeing the real Caleb, the man who dreamed of creating beautiful things, and he was even more compelling than the fantasy I had built in my head. That night, we talked for hours. He showed me more of his drawings, explaining the ideas behind them, his voice losing its earlier tension and filling with a quiet passion. I told him about my own creative process, about the satisfaction of finding the perfect font or color combination. We weren't just the contractor and the graphic designer anymore. We were two people sharing the parts of ourselves that mattered most. A few nights later, we were watching some dumb action movie on his couch. It was late, and the day had been long. I remember the low rumble of the sound system, the flickering lights from the screen, and the comfortable silence that had settled between us. I must have drifted off, my head leaning against the armrest. I don't know how long I was asleep, but when I woke up, the credits were rolling and the room was quiet. Something was different. A soft, wool blanket was tucked around me, pulled up to my chin. My head wasn't on the hard armrest anymore. It was on a soft throw pillow that hadn't been there before. I sat up, blinking, a little disoriented. Caleb was in the kitchen, rinsing our popcorn bowl in the sink, his back to me. He must have heard me move, because he turned around. "Hey, sleepyhead," he said softly, a small, gentle smile on his face. My heart did that stupid fluttering thing again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a reaction to his attractiveness. It was a response to his kindness. He had seen me asleep, and, instead of just waking me up, he had made me comfortable. It was such a small gesture, a simple, thoughtful act. But in the quiet landscape of my life, it felt like a seismic event. It was a moment of care, freely given, and it planted a seed of dangerous, terrifying hope in my chest. He was not just kind out of a sense of obligation. This felt different. This felt personal. That little seed of hope was a fragile, terrifying thing. For the next few days, I found myself analyzing every interaction, every word, every look. When he passed me a mug of coffee in the morning, did his fingers linger on the ceramic for a second too long? When he laughed at one of my dumb jokes, was the smile in his eyes just for me? It was madness. I was turning into a detective of micro-expressions, a scholar of unspoken intentions. My cautious, self-protective nature was at war with this new, burgeoning feeling. Part of me wanted to pull away, to retreat back to the safety of my own predictable world before I got in too deep. The other part of me, the lonely part that had been dormant for so long, wanted to lean into it, to see where this unexpected path might lead. Hope and fear were doing a frantic dance in my chest, and I was getting dizzy. The turning point came on a Wednesday. It was one of those days where everything felt wrong. The repairs on my apartment had hit a snag, pushing the completion date back another week. A big client project I'd been working on was rejected, requiring a complete do-over. By the time evening rolled around, the stress had coalesced into a familiar, dreaded pain behind my right eye. I get migraines, the kind that are completely debilitating, turning light and sound into instruments of torture. I took my medication and retreated to the dark, quiet sanctuary of the guest room, curling up under the covers and pressing a pillow over my head. The world narrowed to the throbbing in my skull. I must have lost track of time, because the next thing I knew, I heard the soft click of the bedroom door opening. "Miles." Caleb's voice was a whisper from the doorway. "You okay? I didn't see you when I got in." "Migraine." I managed to groan, the single word feeling like a monumental effort. The door clicked shut, and I heard his soft footsteps approach the bed. I braced myself for him to say something, to turn on a light, but he didn't. He just sat on the edge of the mattress, the small dip in the bed the only evidence of his presence in the darkness. The silence stretched, and surprisingly, his presence wasn't intrusive. It was grounding. "My mom gets these," he said after a while, his voice still a low murmur. "They're brutal. Is there anything I can get you? Water? Tea?" "No, thanks. Just need to ride it out." I mumbled into the pillow. He was quiet again for a long moment. I could feel the warmth of his body near mine, a stark contrast to the cold ache in my head. Then he said, "You're really tense. I can see it in your shoulders, even in the dark. Sometimes a neck rub helps her. It loosens things up, only if you want. No pressure." My first instinct was to say no. The thought of him touching me, especially now, in this state of heightened vulnerability, was terrifying. It felt too intimate, too charged. But the pain in my head was overwhelming, and another, quieter part of me was curious. I wanted to know what his hands would feel like. So, I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," he whispered. "Just try to relax." He shifted on the bed, moving behind me. I felt the mattress dip more significantly as he positioned himself. I held my breath, my entire body rigid with anticipation. Then, I felt his hands on my shoulders. His palms were warm and slightly calloused from his work, a stark contrast to the softness I imagined from his drawings. His touch was surprisingly gentle, yet firm. He started at the base of my neck, his thumbs pressing into the tight, knotted muscles there. It wasn't a clumsy, awkward massage. He knew exactly what he was doing. His movements were slow, deliberate, and incredibly focused. He worked his way up my neck, into my scalp, then back down to my shoulders, kneading away the tension that had been building all day. At first, all I could focus on was the relief. The throbbing in my head seemed to recede, pushed back by the steady, rhythmic pressure of his hands. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my body starting to finally unclench. But as the physical pain began to fade, a different kind of awareness took its place. I became acutely aware of everything. The scent of sawdust and soap that clung to him. The soft sound of his breathing in the quiet room. The heat of his hands seeping through my t-shirt, warming my skin. The initial, almost clinical nature of the massage slowly melted away, and the space between us became charged with a new, unspoken intimacy. This wasn't just a kind gesture anymore. It felt like a conversation without words. His hands slowed, his thumbs tracing lazy circles on my shoulder blades. My mind, no longer consumed by pain, was now racing with a different kind of intensity. Every point of contact was a jolt, a question. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying. I could feel the steady beat of my own heart, a frantic drumming against my ribs. I wondered if he could feel it too. He leaned in closer, his warmth enveloping me. One of his hands moved from my shoulder to gently cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling lightly in the short hair there. The gesture was so tender, so possessive, it sent a shiver down my spine. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch into an eternity there in the darkness of the guest room. The migraine was a distant memory. The only thing that was real was his touch, and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of what it meant. That was the moment everything changed. The bridge between us was no longer a fragile, tentative structure. It was a solid, electrified reality, and I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that neither of us could go back to the way things were. The next morning, The world felt both brand new and impossibly fragile. The migraine was gone, but it had been replaced by a tension so thick you could taste it. When I emerged from the guest room, Caleb was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee, his back to me. He was usually so relaxed in the mornings, but today his shoulders were rigid. "Morning," he said, without turning around. His voice was carefully neutral. "Morning," I replied, my own voice sounding thin and strange to my ears. I poured myself a glass of water, my movements feeling clumsy and self-conscious. We stood in the kitchen, just a few feet apart, trapped in a bubble of shared, unspoken memory. The intimacy of the previous night hung between us like a ghost. Did he regret it? Was he embarrassed? Or was he feeling the same overwhelming mix of emotions that was churning inside me? We avoided eye contact. We made small talk about the weather. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to pretend that a fundamental line had not been crossed. When he left for work, his "have a good day" was clipped and hurried. The solid clunk of the front door closing echoed in the sudden silence of the apartment, and I let out a long, shaky breath. My mind, a place I usually considered my own well-organized territory, became a chaotic courtroom. The prosecutor, my fear, presented a compelling case. I had imagined everything. It was a simple act of kindness, a platonic gesture from a nice guy who felt sorry for me. He was being kind to his temporary roommate who had a headache. That's all it was. My own loneliness and longing had painted it with a different color, layering it with a significance that didn't exist. I was projecting, creating a fantasy that was destined to crumble and humiliate me. But then the defense attorney, my hope, would present its rebuttal. It would replay the feeling of his thumb tracing circles on my back. It would remind me of the way his hand had so gently cupped my neck, the way his breathing had sounded in the quiet dark. That wasn't just kindness. There was a tenderness there, a hesitation and a focus that went beyond simple platonic care. It felt like a question, an exploration. Right. This internal debate raged all day. I sat in the coffee shop, staring at my laptop screen, unable to focus on a single line of design work. I was replaying every second of the massage, analyzing every touch, every moment of silence, searching for a definitive clue, a piece of irrefutable evidence. But there was none. It all lived in the ambiguous space of feeling and intuition, a place my logical brain hated to be. The fear began to win. It always did. Fear was a familiar companion, a safer one. Hope was a reckless houseguest who left messes and broke things. I decided I couldn't live in this state of agonizing uncertainty. The tension was unbearable. The only solution, the only way to protect myself from the potential crash, was to remove myself from the situation. I had to get out of his apartment. I had to restore the boundary before I did something stupid, like confess my feelings and watch his kind face morph into one of pity or awkwardness. That afternoon, I spent hours online and finally found it. A furnished, short-term sublet just a few neighborhoods over. It was more expensive than I could really afford, but the cost of my peace of mind felt infinitely higher. I called and arranged to move in the next day. The decision felt like a lead weight in my stomach, a strange mix of relief and profound disappointment. I was choosing safety over possibility. I was choosing to walk away. When Caleb came home that evening, I was waiting for him in the living room, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. He looked surprised to see me there. He gave me a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hey, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I stood up. I just wanted to let you know that I found a place. A sublet. I'll be moving my things out tomorrow. But I wanted to thank you, again, for everything. You've been incredibly generous. I watched his face for a reaction. For a split second, I saw something flash in his eyes. Was it disappointment? Surprise? But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that same, careful neutrality. His expression became unreadable, a mask of polite concern. Oh, he said. He cleared his throat. Okay. Wow, that was fast. That's great. I'm glad you found something. His words were all the right ones, but his tone was flat, hollow. He wouldn't look at me, instead focusing on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. The conversation was over in less than a minute. He mumbled something about needing to take a shower and disappeared down the hall. I stood alone in the living room, the silence pressing in on me. I had done it. I had created the distance I thought I needed. So why did it feel less like a victory and more like a surrender? Why did it feel like I had just made a terrible, irreversible mistake? Later that night, I decided to start moving some of the smaller things from my office that I'd brought over. A box of books, my favorite lamp, a portfolio. I wanted to make the move tomorrow as quick and painless as possible. I carried a box down to my car, the quiet hum of the parking garage a stark contrast to the noise in my head. This was it. This was the end of this strange, intense chapter. I loaded the box into my trunk and walked to the driver's side door. I was just about to pull the handle when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. It was Caleb. He had followed me down. He was just standing there, a few feet away, illuminated by the sickly orange glow of the overhead lights. He wasn't wearing his work boots, just socks, as if he'd run out of the apartment without even thinking to put on shoes. "You forgot something," he said, his voice quiet, but it echoed in the concrete space. I frowned, confused. "I don't think so. It's just a few books." He took a slow step closer, then another. "No," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "You did." He kept walking until he was right in front of me, closer than he'd been since the night of the migraine. I could feel the heat radiating from him. My back was pressed against the cold metal of my car door. I had nowhere to go. I put my hand on the car door handle, a nervous, reflexive gesture to create some space, to retreat. But before I could pull it open, he reached out and put his hand over mine, his fingers wrapping around my own. He gently pushed the door shut, his body blocking any chance of escape. He leaned in, placing his other hand on the car's roof, effectively pinning me there. The space between us vanished, and all I could smell was him. All I could feel was his proximity. All I could see was the intense, raw emotion in his eyes. My breath hitched. My entire world had suddenly shrunk to this single, terrifying, exhilarating moment. He was so close. His confident facade was completely gone, replaced by a vulnerability that mirrored my own. His voice was a low, rough whisper, a plea that cut through all my fear and all my doubt. "Don't go yet." I was frozen, trapped between the cold metal of the car and the overwhelming warmth of his body. My mind went completely blank. All the scenarios I had rehearsed, all the self-protective walls I had built, they all crumbled into dust in the face of those three simple words. "Don't go yet." It wasn't a demand. It was a confession. "Caleb," I breathed, my own voice barely audible. I didn't know what else to say. His gaze was so intense, searching my face for something. He finally broke the silence, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "I have to tell you something," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. The pipe bursting in your apartment building. It wasn't just some random accident. It was my fault. I was rushing. I was trying to impress my uncle, who owns the company, by getting the job done ahead of schedule. I cut a corner on an inspection, and it failed. Spectacularly. I stared at him, confused. What does that have to do with anything? He let out a shaky breath, a humorless laugh. Everything. It has everything to do with everything. When your apartment was flooded, I felt like the biggest idiot on the planet. But then Henderson was talking about where you would stay, and this idea hit me. It was a selfish, crazy idea. He shook his head, looking down for a second before his eyes snapped back to mine. "I lied, Miles. I told Henderson my place was the only viable option for you. I made it sound like it was an emergency. It wasn't entirely true. I mean, the other unit wasn't great, but it would have been fine for a night or two. I wanted an excuse." My mind was struggling to catch up. An excuse? An excuse for what? I whispered. "To get to know you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've seen you. In the hallway, at the mailboxes, getting into your car. For months. You're always so quiet, and you have this look on your face like you're figuring out the secrets of the universe. And I just wanted to know what you were thinking about. I wanted a reason to talk to you, but I'm an idiot who breaks things for a living. And you look like you have your entire life perfectly put together. I didn't know how to cross that distance." The confession hit me like a physical force, knocking the air from my lungs. He had seen me. He had been thinking about me. The entire foundation of my reality, built on the assumption of my own invisibility, shattered in an instant. I thought you were straight," I stammered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I thought you were just being nice, taking pity on me because your work wrecked my apartment." A flicker of pain crossed his face. I'm not just nice, he said softly. And I don't know what I am, exactly. I've never felt like this about a guy before. All I know is that when you're in a room, I can't focus on anything else. And when you told me you were leaving, he trailed off, shaking his head again. I can't let you leave thinking this was all just a big, friendly accident. It wasn't an accident. It was a purpose. My purpose. All the fear, all the anxiety I had been marinating in for days, it all just evaporated. It was replaced by a brilliant, blinding clarity. He felt it too. This entire time, while I was dissecting his every move, he was orchestrating ways to get closer to me. The beautiful noise wasn't just noise. It was a signal, and I had been too afraid to hear it. I don't want to go, I said, and the truth of that statement resonated through my entire being. I was just scared. A slow, breathtaking smile spread across Caleb's face. It was the smile I had seen him give his friends, but this time, it was just for me. It was full of relief and hope and 1,000 other things I couldn't wait to discover. Good, he whispered, because I'm pretty scared too. And then, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't tentative or questioning like I might have imagined. It was sure. It was a kiss that was filled with all the conversations we hadn't had, all the stolen glances across hallways, all the unspoken tension of the past 2 weeks. It was firm and gentle all at once, a confirmation of everything he had just said. In the orange glow of the parking garage, with the smell of concrete and gasoline in the air, I kissed him back, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel lonely at all. I felt like I was finally, truly home. I didn't move out the next day. I unpacked the small box from my car and brought it right back upstairs. My short-term sublet went to someone else. And while the repairs on my apartment were eventually finished, I found I spent less and less time there. My life had seamlessly, joyfully merged with Caleb's. The quiet order of my old routine was replaced by a new, happy kind of chaos. We fell into a rhythm that felt both exciting and deeply comfortable. Our weeks were filled with small discoveries. I learned that Caleb hummed off-key when he was concentrating on a drawing, that he hated olives with a fiery passion, and that his tough exterior completely melted around dogs. He learned that I need 2 full cups of coffee before I can form a coherent sentence, that I have an encyclopedic knowledge of 80s sci-fi movies, and that I get a specific wrinkle between my eyebrows when I'm deeply focused on a design. He took me to his secret sketching spots, a forgotten bench overlooking the river, a quiet corner of the botanical gardens. I watched, mesmerized, as he brought the world to life on paper. In return, I helped him. He finally decided to pursue his architectural dream on the side, and I designed a sleek, professional logo and portfolio website for him. We were a team, his artistic vision and my clean aesthetics fitting together as if they were always meant to. Our 2 worlds, once so separate, had become one. A few months later, I was officially moving back into my own apartment. Or rather, my things were. Caleb was there, directing the placement of the sofa like it was a major construction project. When everything was in place, he unrolled a long tube he'd been carefully protecting all day. It was one of his drawings, the one of the crumbling church that I had first seen, now beautifully framed in dark wood. I want this to be the first thing you see when you walk in, he said, his voice soft. To remind you. Remind me of what? I asked, my throat tight with emotion. That you're a brilliant artist. He smiled, that easy, heart-stopping smile that was now my favorite thing in the world. He stepped closer and took my hand. No, to remind you that sometimes things have to fall apart a little so they can be put back together in a much better way. He helped me hang it on the main wall, right across from the door. It looked perfect. It looked like it belonged. That night, we lay on my couch, in my own apartment, tangled up together. The space didn't feel like just mine anymore. It felt like ours. His scent was on the pillows, his sketchbook was on my coffee table, and his drawing was on my wall. My quiet sanctuary was no longer just a sanctuary from the world. It was a sanctuary for us. It's funny, isn't it? How your life can be moving in one direction, a straight, predictable line, and then a single, unexpected event can send it spinning onto a new and infinitely better path. A burst pipe and a flooded ceiling felt like a catastrophe at the time. I saw it as a disruption, a violation of my carefully controlled peace. But I was wrong. It wasn't a violation, it was an invitation. I had built my walls so high to keep the loneliness out, but I hadn't realized they were also keeping the joy out. Sometimes, you have to let the walls get washed away to find out who you were truly meant to build a life with.